Today, of course, is Zion Adar, 7th of Adar, connected to Purim. We all know the famous Gemara Megillah, which we learned here, I believe, that when Haman landed his pur, when he landed his raffle on the month of Adar, he was very happy because he knew that Moshe Rabeinu passed away in Adar. The Gemara says he knew that Moshe Rabeinu passed away, but didn't know that he was born in that day. And there's a famous question on the Gemara, which many of the commentaries discuss, which is, if Haman knew, such a scholar, knew that Moshe Rabeinu passed away, why didn't he know he was born? Yeah, well, one's more explicit than the verse, one's less explicit. But one of the explanations is rather simple, that he figured, of course, he knew Moshe Rabeinu was born then. But death cancels birth. It's okay, he's born, but death canceled it, so who cares? And, well, then the question becomes, well, what's the answer to the Gemara? Isn't he right? Doesn't death cancel birth? So there comes the famous comment in Rashi, where when Rashi, after the Gemara says, Lo Yav Yodid, the Beshiva Noilad, that he didn't know that Moshe Rabeinu was born on the 7th, Rashi comments, little comment, and he concludes, the day of birth is enough to atone for the day of death, which means that's what he didn't know. Not that he didn't know when he was the technical date, but he didn't realize that birth atones for death. Well, why is that? Why is it that birth atones for death rather than the reverse, death canceling birth? So many explanations are given, and one of them is, and this is quoted often in Chassidus, is obviously depends what type of life a person lives. The neshama not born nor does it die. It has stages. The stages before it's in the body, the stage while it's in the body, and the stage when it's after it leaves the body. But the question is, which one of these events, its birth or its death, has the greater impact and change, as it were, on the neshama? If a person's life isn't, every Kol Yisrael Malay Mitzvahs Karimin, all Jews are filled with mitzvahs like a pomegranate is filled with seeds, the Gemara tells us. And as we're learning here, this is the opening chapter, is that every single Jew has a share in the world to come. So certainly every Jew has grown, and the neshama has earned greater heights as a result of it coming to this earth, certainly. But sometimes a person has to go through a cleansing process till he gets to that greater height. So in that sense, death has to fix up, as it were, what was done in birth, in life, or was missing in life. Whereas someone like Moshe Rabeinu, whose life is in connection with Hashem to begin with, and actually the fact that he came into this world is nischaper, enhances what will happen to him in death. So in his death, it's not a cancellation of his life, but the ultimate continuation and culmination of his birth, of his life. And this is echoed in the famous words of the Alter Rebbe in part 4 of Tanya, section 27, letter number 27. It's a collection of letters there, Gersa Kodesh, where there he writes, the reason why a tzaddik is more alive post-physical death than he was during life, and this is, as Rabbi explains it in numerous places, is because the tzaddik's life, even when he was alive, was his love of Hashem, his fear of Hashem, and his service of Hashem. That was his life even when he was physically alive. So even in the physical, his physical wasn't his real life. His life was his spiritual. And now that his only spiritual, so the life he always lived in the physical is now more alive, given the fact that it was always spiritual, and now that spirituality is taken to a whole new height. And that's the message of Zion Adar. Living, first of all, the knowing that tzaddikim live on after their physical death in greater measure. That birth atones for their death, in the words of Rashi, because their life itself is even more enlivened after their physical death. And in fact, the Gemara says elsewhere a very similar thing. Loi meis Moshe. Moshe didn't die.
Yaakov didn't die.
There's Yaakov Vino Loi meis is one Gemara, and Loi meis Moshe was another Gemara.
Is that a Gemara?
Yeah, it's another Gemara. Yeah. That just like he can serve Hashem during his life, he can serve Hashem after his life. Yeah, the Gemara discusses it.
Yaakov, of course.
The Gemara discusses it. But the point being, if I'm not mistaken, the Gemara, now you're making me doubt it, I'm going to have to look it up after.
I think it's a Zohar.
No, not a Zohar. Maybe it's a Medrash, but I'm pretty sure it's a Gemara. Anybody have Hebrew on their phone? Google Lemes Moshe. Anyway, we'll look it up after, but I'm quite certain it's in the Gemara. That make me doubt it, but I'm pretty sure it's in the Gemara. I remember being on the bottom of a page and then the top of the next page. Malahalan and Mishamash, just like he served Hashem during his lifetime, continued serving after his lifetime. The point being that
serving as
sorry?
Hashem.
We have reviewed this before.
That's one Gemara, but there's another Gemara that says Lemes Moshe.
The Gemara says clearly that the Tzaddikim, when they're dead, are considered alive, and Rishayim, they're alive, considered dead.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The Chayayim, Kuriyim, Mason, that in their life they're considered in their life.
Maybe that doesn't say Moshe. It's still serving Hashem. That's possible.
No, I'm pretty sure the Lashon is Lemes Moshe. I have to look it up.
Yeah, look it up.
I have to look it up. If I'm not mistaken, that's the Lashon. I could be wrong about the sourcing, but that Lashon is definitely clear stuck in my head. Sorry? Yeah, that's anyway. At any rate, the point being that that's number one, understanding and acknowledging that tzaddikim live on after their death in a way that's in some degree even more than when they're physically alive, and therefore connection to them is still possible. That's number one. And number two, knowing ourselves that in the way we live, in the way we are nolad, living a life that transcends Misa, that transcends death, right? That the nolda, like Rashi says, that the birth should atone for death, as if to say that living a life itself that transcends the physicality that comes and goes.
Because Gemara says clearly, like said, he was born and died, or he died and others, he did die.
That's right, physically. Well, yeah, sure, certainly. The Gemara says something about Yaakov. The Gemara didn't say so explicitly, but nevertheless, the Gemara acknowledges that they had a funeral, that they had a.
Moshe clear says he died.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, we all know this. Okay, I'm going to look it up afterwards.
The explanation is simply that it lives on through his either his children or his disciples. So he's never really dead as such.
That's actually one of the big differences between Moshe Rabeinu and.
When they say the Gemara, if we repeat the Torah of someone.
That's one of the interesting distinctions between Moshe Rabeinu and Yaakov.
Yes. Whereas
when it comes to Yaakov, it says Mazar B'chav B'chaim, that Yaakov's children are alive, therefore he's alive. When it comes to Moshe Rabeinu, it says Malahalan and Mishamash. The same way he served Hashem before his death. Afkan and Mishamash. He continues to serve Hashem. So whereas when it comes to Yaakov Avinu, it talks about the way his children are alive and therefore he's alive. When it comes to Moshe Rabeinu, it talks about how he himself continues to serve Hashem even after his death. So it's a different element, even though they're very much connected. Yeah. In that, because Moshe Rabeinu continues to serve Hashem now, even after death, is why we are able to continue to live on and to live His message. But
his children were great. Yaakov was
spiritual Zarei, spiritual Zarei.
But they want a more literal. That's why they say Moshe Misham.
Spiritual Zarei. But either way, the point is that because Moshe Rabeinu continues to serve Hashem now, is why us as His spiritual offspring are capable of continuing to learn. So the two Gemaras are very much connected.
And that's the fault of Haman, because he sees that the Jews are down, but he doesn't realize they're always going to come back. Always rebirth.
Okay. We get back to our discussion with Doeg, and as we mentioned yesterday, for whatever reason, Doeg and Achasofel are often lumped together. Even though, as the Gemara is going to comment, they never saw each other. Let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines on the bottom of the page. Kufav Beis 106b. The parentheses. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says, Doeg, this Doeg, the Edomite we've been talking about the last few days, last few shiurim, the one who was in King Shaul's council, and then lied and betrayed King David by telling King Shaul that King David was hiding in Noiv with the Kohanim and causing their massacre. He's one of the people who forfeited a share in the world to come, which is why he's being discussed here in this Gemara. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Doeg, V'Achisofel and Achisofel. Achisofel, we also mentioned him yesterday, is Achisofel was first a advisor to King David. The Gemara commented earlier that he saw that his offspring would eventually be king, which I think was his great-grandchild or somebody became a king later, but he thought the prophecy was about himself, and therefore he joined Avshalom's rebellion in the hopes that that would make him live that out and actually become king. So the Gemara says, Doeg and Achisofel loyro zeh. They never saw each other. Doeg b'mei Shaul. Doeg was in the times of Shaul, Achisofel, and Achisofel b'mei David in the times of David. Now, King Shaul and King David overlapped, and they certainly saw each other. King David married Shaul's daughter, and King David ran a rebellion against King Shaul. So it's interesting that the Gemara is commenting that, at least at this point, the Gemara doesn't. It's not a full comment yet. We have to get to the rest of it. Why? Because Doeg lived with Shaul. and Achishofel lived with King David, would that mean that they haven't seen each other? Maybe they overlap, just like King David and King Saul themselves overlapped. So explains the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan further states, Doeg v'Achishofel, both Doeg and Achishofel, leichatzi yumeim, didn't make it through half their life. This is a similar comment that we had earlier, studying the same Gemara. How do we get to this idea that they didn't live half their life? And what does life mean? So explains the Gemara. Tanya Nemahachi, we have a brisa, we have an original Mishnaic age text which reads a similar thing, which is, the verse reads in Tehillim, Tehillim 55:24. Anshe dom mamirma, men of blood and deceit, meaning those who are wicked, specifically blood and deceit, connected to Doeg, who both lied, deceit, and caused bloodshed, caused the massacre of the people of Noiv, the Kohanim. So these people of blood and deceit, don't make it through halfway their lives. What's halfway life? So average life, says the pasuk, is 70 years. If one's strong, it's 80 years. But Baruch Hashem, today we're living closer to Mashiach's time, so the life expectancy is getting longer, which is also prophesied. Right? There's a famous pasuk which says that at least at a certain point during Mashiach's time, a person dies at 100 or 200 years old, it's going to be a tragedy. We're getting there. But pre-Mashiach, Messianic era, average life, says the pasuk, is 70 or 80 years. So the pasuk says those who are of deceit and bloodshed don't make it through halfway the life, so you got to go halfway to 70. So less than 35. So if they lived very short, they both lived very short, and Achishofel himself made it long enough in life to work for King David and rebel against Avshalom, and he only made it to 35 years old, or less than that, then he couldn't have lived early enough to have met Doeg, who himself died early. These two statements, the Gemara doesn't explicitly connect them, but it would seem to me that they are connected, and that's how you explain this Gemara. And if the Gemara explains, Kol Shnois of Shel Doeg, all the years of Doeg. Rashi doesn't comment on this. Kol Shnois of Shel Doeg, all the years of Doeg, L'hayu el Shloshim v'arba was only 34 years, less than 35. V'shel Achishofel, and Achishofel in el Shloshim v'shalosh were only 33. I don't know why the Gemara comes to this conclusion. Why weren't they both 34? Why was one 34 and one 33? I don't know. And the other thing is, Achishofel is also a person of deceit and bloodshed. Bloodshed, certainly, because he rebelled with Avshalom. Is there anywhere explicit about Achishofel being deceitful and lying? I don't remember, but certainly about Doeg, he lied to King Shaul and then caused the massacre. Anyway, so Achishofel dies at 33, Doeg dies at 34, and therefore Doeg living in Shaul's time doesn't see Achishofel lives in King David's time. They both have very short lives. Whereas King David himself lived for 70 years, giving him time to overlap between all these people. Okay. Now we get to a comment, an elaboration on the famous Mishnah in Perek Chelek about King David referring to Achishofel as his teacher, given that he taught him only one thing. This is a Mishnah you made reference to earlier, Michael. Says the Gemara, Rabbi says 3 lines from the bottom of the page, Kovav Medbeis. Rabbi further stated, but Tchila, to start with, Kara David referred to Achishofel. David initially referred to King David to Achishofel, which was his advisor, as I mentioned, who later joined David, son of Avshalom, in rebellion. First, he referred to him as Rabbi. He referred to him as my teacher. Because the Gemara comments in Perek Chelek, he taught him 2 things, was it? Right? Yeah, I think the Mishnah says that he taught him 2 things. So he called him teacher. Ulubasoif, the Mishnah actually elaborates. Aluf Rabbi Alufim Yidai, a more elaborate version of this, but at least of this part. So David called Achishophel's teacher, Ulubasoif Kara Chaverei, and then later he called him just a friend, a colleague. Ulubasoif Kara Talmud, then he called him a student, meaning Achishofel slowly degenerated to the point that King David looked down at him, rather than first as a superior, then as an equal, then looked down at him. So B'tchila Kara Rabbi, a verse which backs up the idea that King David originally referred to Achishofel as his teacher, because the verse reads in Tehillim 55:14, Va'ata, and you, Enosh, man, Ke'erki, of my stature, Alufe, my superior, my teacher, Miyudai, and my informer, one who teaches me. This is the verse quoted there in Perek Chelek. And it seems like this whole chapter 55 is referring to, actually we know it for sure that the whole 55 is talking about the battle with Avshalom. Right? The whole chapter 55, how does it open up? It talks about the battle with Avshalom. That's where the song Pad Avshalom Nafshi comes from. King David says, "My soul is redeemed in peace." It's a reference to the fact that he survived and the battle, the rebellion of his son. So the whole chapter is talking about, the whole 55 is talking about Avshalom, and Achishaph joined Avshalom. So these are verses referring to him. So he says, "You people of my stature, my opponents, Achishaph in this case, my master and my one who taught me information, Miyudai." So that's the verse which says that is being referred to as a teacher. But later, we said that later, Rabbi Yochanan said that later, King David stopped referring to him as a teacher, rather referred to him as a colleague, as an equal. This comes later, the very next verse in that same chapter in Tehillim, which reads, Asher Yachdav Namtik Soib Beis Elikim Nahalas Baragesh. That which together we have come to the secret to the house of Hashem, let's go in calm. In other words, he's asking that things should settle smoothly, but here he's saying let's walk together. So we're equals. But later he referred to him as someone lower than him, of a lower stature, a student. This actually, the verse does not come from the same chapter 55, it comes from chapter 41 in Tehillim. It says, Gam ish shalomi asher batachti boy. Also the complete man in whom I trusted, referring to Achishaph, who was originally his advisor. Oichel lachmi, who ate my bread. Higdal olai ekev, raised upon me a heel, meaning came to fight me. So the one who I trusted, who ate my bread, now is fighting against me, referring to Achishaph. But the way he refers to him as someone who's eating my bread, Rashi comments, eating my bread doesn't just mean literally eating my food, which he did because he lived in the palace, but eating my bread refers to he studied my Torah. That is to say, he learned from me. So originally called him teacher, then colleague, let's walk together, and then my student, one who has eaten my bread. Okay, let's begin this next Gemara. I want to.
It's interesting though, like going from teacher to colleague. That seems like a harder thing to understand than the last.
How so?
Because he betrayed him. When he betrayed him, then you realize, oh, okay, this is not my friend. This is the enemy. That's easily understood.
Well, it's interesting.
How to go from being a teacher
to a colleague.
That's an interesting.
But to compound some more questions onto that, which is something I've been thinking about, but welcome to think about it as well. He's referring to him as a student, right? So the simple reading of the Gemara is that it's talking about like a slow degeneration in their relationship, right? But it doesn't refer to him and first my teacher, someone I revered, then a colleague, an equal I hope to settle peace with. That's the verse seems to imply. And then he was an enemy that I had to crush, as it were, an opponent to crush. But that's not the way the Gemara refers to it. It's a student. A student's not negative. He learned from me. He ate my bread. It's fantastic. I want to feed Torah to as many people as I can. Do I not? So it's not necessarily even negative. It's just not as illustrious as a colleague or as a teacher. So it's interesting that he refers to him even when he's my enemy, and he wants to refer to him as in a negative, in a state of he's my opponent. He's hidolai eka. Okay, he's opposing me. Right? He's opposing me, yet doesn't refer to him as like an enemy and an opponent that I have to obliterate, but rather as a student, which presumably I have to raise up. That's what a student's there for. That's what a teacher's supposed to do for a student, to raise them up. So even as he's an enemy, he's not referring to him as an opponent, but rather as a student. Almost like King David feels responsible for his behavior in some way, which would make sense. It's talking about his son also. He wants to destroy his son. He'd much rather not.
Better not give or not kill son.
Rather not.
Okay.
Right. He also the whole thing,
he said, don't kill him.
Which is part of the theme of the whole chapter in 55. It's part of Shalom Nafshi. He wants to redeem his soul in peace, not through war. He'd rather avoid the whole thing. So even Achishaph, he's saying, he's my student. He learned from me. I'd much rather him.
Redeem him.
Yeah, redeem him rather than. That's what seems to be going on here.
Also, you can say it's a function of the age is that David HaMelech was growing in Torah, and Akatofel was the limitation was going down. So originally David was but then as one's rising and one's falling, eventually they meet, and then
so
eventually.
that's how they maybe
Yeah,
established.
remember, Akatofel was still young, and David, of course, was the rebellion occurred near the end of his life. So
End of David's life and Achisefel's life.
yeah, but Akatofel was young, and David was accumulating wisdom.
What's even more interesting, another thing that's interesting to add to this, is the fact that the Mishnah, which you mentioned in Perek Chelek, which says that King David referred to Achisefel as Rabbi Olifi Miyudai, my teacher, my master, and the one who informs me Torah, is meant to be a lesson for us how we treat people who taught us things. So we're deriving a lesson from the way David treated someone only initially. Later he changed the way he referred to him. But the Mishnah omits that. The Mishnah omits the fact that later Achisefel degenerated and therefore he referred to him as a student. The Mishnah cuts the story short and says, lesson for you, treat someone who taught you anything, even one thing, as your teacher and master. Ma David Melech Yisrael, just like if the King David, which is interesting. I mean, in isolation, it's a lesson in and of itself, but it's just interesting that the Mishnah doesn't tell us the rest of the context of what happened. I'm just putting that out there. I don't know. Anyway.
It also shows like the character of King David as being, he had every right to feel or to act on a vengeful manner, but he restrained himself. He looked at the good, tried to redeem someone.
Yeah, it's a big theme of a lot of the talks in Chassidus on this chapter. When he talked about Pada B'Shalom Nafshi, redeem my soul in peace, that King David got to a level where his redemption from enemies wasn't through war, which is really the way his King Shlomo HaMelech reigned, following the work of King David, who set the path for this towards the end of his life at least. King Shlomo HaMelech's was peace, was held, his redemption from his enemies was held in peace through negotiations rather than through war and bloodshed. Anyway, okay, so next Gemara, let's begin the next Gemara just because we have more time now, but the Gemara really requires more discussion, analysis, and we'll begin it now and we'll see maybe tomorrow a little bit more. Make at least one comment for today. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Yehuda said the name of Rav. La'olam, as a rule, Yavi Adam Atzma L'dei Nisayon. A person should not bring himself to a test. You shouldn't ask for tests. You don't try to prove yourself as a hero. Serve Hashem when you're called upon, and don't try to prove yourself for anything. We actually say this every single morning in our brachas, as part of our list of blessings. We say every single morning. We say, "Al Tzvi'enu L'dei Nisayon." Please don't bring me to a test. We don't want it. We don't want the risks. Hashem so gives you a test, so we're ready to take it on because we have to serve Hashem. But we're not asking for tests. Now, what's the proof? So it says the Gemara like this: Shari David Melech Yisrael, David the king of Israel, Hevi Atma de Nisayon, brought upon himself a test, the nichshal, and succumbed to the test. He failed, gave in. How so? Amar Lafanov, King David said before Hashem, the master of the universe, why is it that during prayer all Jews say, Elokei Avram, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob? We say this every single day, numerous times. Why don't they say the King of David, God of David? Why don't they say that? So says Hashem, Omar. So God responds, Inu, those Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, initially, they were tested on my behalf, and they passed the tests, and therefore they earned that right. But you, initially, you haven't been tested by me, and therefore, not yet. His fight with King Shaul is not a test. His fight with Goliath is not a test.
You're talking about a test.
Apparently not.
The Yetzer, to overcome, that's a test.
These things also involve the Yetzer.
No, but that's easier. That's like,
I don't know about that. That's
here's what they tested with a
you have to compare it to all the tests, but the other ones didn't have tests of that nature either. Avram Yitzchak Yaakov didn't have a test of that nature either.
I've met a test to go against nature, for example, in the Akeda.
Yes, but not necessarily specific for lust. But so no, going against you, taking a little short guy taking on a giant is against one's nature. At least certainly logically, once you stand down.
He was a good fighter. He knew that.
It still logically was, everybody was afraid.
No, he wasn't afraid at all, because the thing is...
I said everybody was afraid, which is why everybody stood down.
But the thing is, he learned his techniques in the field by being a shepherd.
You can rationalize all this stuff. I'm just commenting. Anyway, I'm just commenting. I'm putting it out there. I'm not, God forbid, we're learning the Gemara, obviously. I'm just commenting. These are things that we have to think about. Okay, so Amar Lefanov. So Hashem says, okay, you never tested, and they were tested. Fine. So Amar Lefanov. So David says to Hashem, the Master of the universe, test me and put me through a trial.
He was asking Hashem because of this.
That's right. Well, this is Gemara telling us the backstory. He wanted to be on the list of the forefathers. Test me. Shenemar, as the pasuk says.
Moshe.
What?
This Abraham and Moshe is never mentioned during the...
Not in this context. Which is a good question, but not in this context.
No, you can see why, because you see the Avos of the Jewish people and David and Mashiach, these are a line. Moshe didn't create a line. It's a great person, but didn't create a lineage.
Anyway, we refer to it as Torah's Moshe, but we don't say Lakai Moshe, which is interesting. But anyway, so the Gemara says like this. So what's the Shemaz? The verse reads in Tehillim 26:2, B'chaneni Hashem v'nasani. David Melech says, God test me and put me through a trial. So Omar, so God says, okay, no problem. I'm going to test you. And I'm going to do something with you. I'm going to do something for you which I didn't do for them. Sorry, and I'll do something for you. To them, I didn't tell them what the test was going to be. I didn't inform them before the test what's going to be. I just told them, or they just faced the test. But I'm going to inform you. I'm telling you now that I'm going to test you with an issue related to lust. And we'll get into the details of the story going tomorrow. But at this point in the Gemara, you already see one thing, which is absolutely incredible. It doesn't say so explicitly, but the context seems to be saying that Hashem is saying that I'm informing you of this because what you're about to face is in some way, this is what the context at least seems, it doesn't say so explicitly. Why is Hashem saying, look, you're going to see that even though I'm going to inform you, you still won't be able to handle it. That's kind of what Hashem is saying. I didn't tell them, and they passed. But I'm telling you, and you'll see how hard it is. Almost seems like the test that King David is receiving is in some degree, in some angle, harder than the tests that the forefathers faced. Now imagine this. This would mean the test of lust is more difficult to bypass, at least to some degree, than the test of Avraham taking his son Isaac on the altar.
Yeah,
imagine that. Which tells you two things. Number one, when you see someone else who, God forbid, failed at this, right? So, like the famous Mishnah says, don't judge someone until you come to his place. And there's the Alter Rebbe's famous chapter on this, based on previous commentaries. You don't know his situation, literally his physical location, where he hangs out all day, and what he meets, and what he sees, which not necessarily do you, and you don't know his nature. Maybe the way Hashem made his nature is that he's very difficult for him to control himself. And his Alter Rebbe puts it there, did you put a quarter of the effort in your davening did you put a quarter of the effort in your davening in what you are expecting him to do, with the effort you are expecting him to do that he would require to hold himself back from what he did? You're saying that he should have held himself back. This is like you judging the person who failed in such an issue. You know how much effort it would take for him to control himself in that? And did you put a quarter of that effort into your davening? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's number one. It's the first thing to tell you how difficult it is. But you look at other people. Number two is, hey, look at yourself. King David. This is what the Gemara opens up with. Don't ask for a test. I'm okay, I can handle it. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't put yourself in a situation that will lead you, God forbid, to be tempted by something that is more difficult than the test of Abraham taking his very own son to the altar. It's already this, before we get to the rest of the story, which itself has many lessons, as we'll learn tomorrow, God willing, this itself is a lesson for both how you look at others and how you look at yourself. Have a wonderful day, and cliffhanger for tomorrow, God willing.